Hi everyone, it's me, Dr. Kendra Becker from the Family Wellness Center of Connecticut in Waterford, Connecticut. Today is my final lecture in this amazing series, and it is called Facts Over Fear, Keeping Yourself Healthy During a Pandemic. So, as you all know already, I am a research guru. I love research. I love reading studies. I love, just calculating and corroborating facts that are out there and watching science evolve, especially during the pandemic. So again, today I have a bunch of research that we're going to go over about some of the healthy and more natural and alternative ways to be able to help keep our bodies healthy during this pandemic. All right, we all know regular things that help us with envelope viruses are things like vitamin A, vitamin C, vitamin D. There's some great research about some of these things, and we're going to go over them today. So as usual, I'm going to share my screen and and we're going to start with this one. So for those of you who have been following this pandemic from the beginning, back in March or April, there was quite a bit of information that had come out about something called convalescent plasma therapy. So convalescent plasma therapy is basically plasma that's been taken out of the bodies of people who have already been infected and then introduced into the bodies of people who need to passively make or garner immunity. So what was interesting is the vast majority of patients who have recovered from COVID-19 illness develop some sort of level of circulating or neutralizing antibodies. What's interesting is that in some cases we're not able to test for it, but we do know that they exist. So there have been multiple published and unpublished studies to show that now reported use of convalescent plasma therapy in severely ill or critically ill patients without unexpected or serious adverse events. So that's great news. So they were using this initially back in March and April in the hospital, where patients were profoundly ill on ventilators before we kind of knew better. And we're having great results with that. So this is a great article that came out of, I'll show you. This one came out of the American Society of Hematologists, so they should know about blood. If anybody's interested in the research, certainly you can see it up there. All right. So the next article that I have pulled for you is great. Israeli scientists find antibodies that neutralize coronavirus. So this was kind of along the lines of trying to work in the beginning. As you know, the US had given billions of dollars to a whole bunch of vaccine manufacturers to try to find a vaccine for coronavirus. The problem is that coronavirus has been around since the beginning of time, and there's never been an ability to make a successful vaccine for it, largely because it is a big, fat, quick mutator. So when that happens, it's very difficult to have a vaccine for a virus that mutates that quickly. You can't identify and isolate the virus, and you certainly can't make immunities for it because the virus changes so quickly. So this particular company was looking at, it was called the Israel Institute of Biological Research, and they had completed groundbreaking scientific research in determining that an antibody can neutralize the coronavirus. So the antibody was monoclonal, it was new and refined, and it contains an exceptionally low proportion of harmful proteins. The Institute had demonstrated the ability of the antibody to neutralize coronavirus, and the antibody was specifically tested on aggressive coronavirus, because as we know, the coronavirus that initially came out of China is a vastly different animal than what we're seeing now here in America, gratefully, because what we're seeing now is much, much milder. So, and again, this is really just a step in the right direction as far as looking for treatments over vaccination, because what we really need to do in the case of coronavirus, which is a very rapidly replicating virus, is we really need to find effective treatment, because I don't know that cure is something that we'll be able to see, because when you have a virus that is constantly mutating, you have a virus that is constantly exploring a new population to be able to infect. So we can talk a little bit about a susceptible host in a bit. So the next article I have is one of my favorites, and I've referenced this multiple times. And this is the efficacy of glutathione in relieving dyspnea, which is shortness of breath, associated with COVID pneumonia. So we know overwhelmingly that there's been tons of research that shows people that have low vitamin D are more susceptible to COVID. We know that we have seen tons of research that shows that individuals who have low levels of glutathione are also more susceptible to COVID. And the reason that that is because glutathione is an antioxidant that is manufactured by the body. It's the only thing that the human body cells have to be able to protect themselves. So based on what we know about coronavirus, how it actually inserts itself into a cell, we know that viruses need a host. And if you have a cell membrane that's damaged or depleted and doesn't have enough glutathione stores to protect it, you certainly would have increased susceptibility of that virus to be able to enter your cell, become a host, and then subsequently replicate. And then that host, that human, would end up getting sick or symptomatic from that particular virus. So what I thought was nice about this is that it's a really nice case report that goes through to show that if we use glutathione in patients, and in this case, they evaluated both the effects of oral and IV glutathione in 2 patients. And the oral and IV glutathione precursors and N-acetylcysteine, which we'll talk about in a minute, represent novel treatment for blocking the NF-κB and addressing the cytokine storm, which is really what the biggest concern is with coronavirus when we're seeing patients succumb to corona. So I thought that was great. And we know overwhelmingly that glutathione helps. It's the most potent antioxidant that the body can create. And when we have normal levels of glutathione, our bodies are really, really healthy. And when our levels are low, we are really susceptible to friability of all kinds of cells. And then I want to talk a little bit about herd immunity. And what I suspect, particularly in the area that I'm in Connecticut, is I suspect corona probably rolled through here in November and December. I had some very, very strange cases of people who were sick and coughing. In fact, I had a handful of pregnant women. I had about a half dozen pregnant women that were sick and coughing that had been swabbed multiple times for flu A, flu B, and for strep and had come up negative. And after being swabbed, we had just kind of decided it was a virus. So we did regular virus protocol things. Everybody got better initially. And I think that there was quite a bit that had initially rolled through really before the hype of the pandemic and the impact of the pandemic had really hit the area. And I think that's why in the area that I'm in Connecticut, we've seen very, very little coronavirus cases on record, largely because I think what we had seen as far as coronavirus had rolled through much, much earlier. So I'm hoping that helps us going forward as far as, decreasing our susceptibility as a population. So anyway, this study was published back in March, I think. Yeah, back in March. And it really just discussed the herd immunity threshold. And what's really interesting about the herd immunity threshold, and you can see it here, is that, first of all, they talked about susceptibility. And we've heard a lot in the media about RO numbers, which is the estimate of, how viral this virus could be. And so they're calling this virus a 2.4, and something like norovirus is a 4, and something like measles is a 12. So we certainly know that the infectivity rate is substantial, but not nearly as substantial as some of the other stuff that we have seen, roll through our populations over the years. So I just really like this because it really talked about some of the things that went on in Sweden, how they just stopped all really large gatherings and really kind of contained and controlled coronavirus pretty effectively. So I thought that was great. And then here's another piece of research that I found. And this is a really interesting study that came out in July that used dipridamol, which is a dye, a radioactive dye that we use to do stress tests in people and to look at, cardiovascular health in individuals in a standard test. So what's interesting is that this particular study used dipridamol largely because this, the SARS-CoV-2, the coronavirus, can cause acute respiratory distress syndrome, problems with the circulation, hypertension, and multi-organ dysfunction, well reported. The effective antivirals with safe clinical profile has really not been determined. And so in particular, in this particular study, they treated 8 patients with dipridamol, and look at the results. 7 patients achieved clinical cure and were discharged from the hospital while one patient remained in the hospital but was in clinical remission. So even though these studies are small, The research is very, very new. The point here is that people are actively looking at cure. People are actively looking at useful and beneficial treatment. And this stuff is all common stuff that's been around, that's been safety tested, that's been tried and true, and that's been used in hospitals and clinical settings for many, many years. So I wanted to bring this up because one of my personal obsessions is ozone and ozone therapy. I absolutely love what ozone can do for the human body. I think it is one of the most restorative things that we can do. And in Portugal, they were using ozone and suggesting that ozone could actually cure COVID-19. So we know that ozone, O3, can kill 100% of viruses. That's what the nature of it is. That's why ozone exists in our, in our air supply, in our oxygen supply, and in our atmosphere. So what was interesting here is that this was something that, the mainstream media didn't want really the information to get out. So they went in and actually raided this clinic and jailed these 2 doctors. And this was back in July. So I do have a couple other ozone studies that I will show you just because, like I said, I think the stuff is totally amazing. And then this is one of my most favorite studies and one of the things that I discuss with my patients all the time, in the inhibition of severe acute respiratory syndrome and coronavirus replication in a lethal SARS-CoV mouse model by stinging nettle. Okay, does everybody know what stinging nettle is? It grows pretty prolifically around here. We find them in our gardens. They're those little, we call them weeds. They're not really weeds, they're herbs that come up that have all the little prickers and pokers on them. And if the prickers poke your finger or your leg or whatever, you get kind of a big wheal or rash. So if you take the stinging nettle and you dry it, you certainly could grind it up and use it as tea or, mix it in soups and stews and things like that. But the study in this particular mouse model, and there have been several studies since then in human models showing that the nettle actually stops the replication and the insertion of the coronavirus into a cell, similar to how glutathione works. So I love nettle all during the season when I was seeing all these weird cases come through my practice, and before we had testing for corona and before we were really even educated on it, I was drinking a whole bunch of nettle tea just because it's something that I happen to like. And so what I thought was really interesting is that I'm wondering if it's one of those things that actually help, me maintain my health, through this season. So, but anyway, all the research is here, and basically what it showed is that nettle was, very effective in reducing and eliminating the symptoms and the replication of COVID-19. So in the very beginning, back in March and April, there was a lot of talk about using IV vitamin C to fight corona. Now, there are some caveats with IV vitamin C. Number one, you can't give real high dose unless you've looked at somebody's genetics. Number two, you have to be very careful about how the IV vitamin C is dosed. And really the studies that had originally come out of South Korea and China really looked at a dose of around 25, I think it was about 25 grams daily in divided doses IV to be able to reduce the clinical symptoms. So there were some very, very effective studies. Dr. Oz even brought it up, and the clinical trial data showed that if you were deficient in vitamin C, or that you were severely immunocompromised, that certainly you had a higher susceptibility rate for COVID-19, and also the use of IV vitamin C could be very, very effective. So all of these studies are published in the US Library of Medicine. I thought it was really great. I have a whole battery of studies on vitamin C alone that came out of the Linus Pauling Institute. He's the king of vitamin C, if anybody wants any information about that. Also, the Orthomolecular Medicine News Service, they have tremendous battery of studies. But I thought that was really great information, and we knew that it had been used, throughout the world very, very successfully. So that information is there. And then again, just another article here about the benefits of IV vitamin C, or excuse me, this one is actually talks about oral vitamin C as well. The Chinese teams were adding vitamin C to the list of potential therapies, and this references the same study that you had seen before on the orthomolecular studies and things like that. So the information is here. We know that the benefit of using vitamin C, of course, is that it's a very potent antioxidant and it helps reduce the risk of the cytokine damage or cytokine storm that we are seeing in coronavirus. So now, if I ruled the world, this is what I would use. Okay, not exclusively, but something that I really, really think is very effective. Ultraviolet light. And, you know, I said from the beginning, you know, every airport and every train station should have an ultraviolet light that they can shine in a small area that everybody has to walk through, like, you know, the entrance door or the exit door or something. And, you know, we've seen overwhelmingly that ultraviolet light can kill coronavirus on surfaces. We know that it can kill coronavirus, you know, overwhelmingly and very, very effectively. So, you know, if we had that and included that, and maybe even the ozone, like if we had used ozone to clean filters like on airplanes and things like that, we could substantially and verifiably reduce the risk of coronavirus for our patients and for ourselves. So there are lots and lots of UV light, you know, sanitizers that are everywhere. You've seen them out. It's not new technology at all. You know, local salons will use it to clean their equipment in between manicures and pedicures. Certainly you see it, you know, for surface cleaning. Certainly you see it in hospitals, but it's can be very, very effective in killing, you know, any and all viruses, including COVID-19. And then the last study that I wanted to talk about, I'll show you the title, and then we're just going to go to the little highlighted area, is from the National Ozone Association. They're pretty cool people, and they're certainly very astute and effective at finding all of the studies that show that ozone can be very, very effective. Ozone gas has already proven to kill the SARS coronavirus. And since the structure of the new COVID 2019 novel coronavirus has almost an identical structure to the SARS coronavirus, it is relatively safe to say that it will work on new coronavirus. Although it must be noted that there are no studies to date, except one that is currently ongoing in the China Institute of Virology that actually discusses the implications of ozone on coronavirus specifically. But I mean, the truth is I'm always an advocate for clean air and clean food and nature cure over any and all of these other, you know, possibly evaluated, maybe not evaluated, you know, pharmaceutical, you know, quote, cures. So I do believe as resilient. I do believe that we are really, really great at, you know, healing ourselves. And I do believe that one of the biggest problems we could potentially have is just the overwhelming problem of just fear and the constant barrage of being fearful. And so if we spend a lot of time being fearful, then we have, you know, huge problems with our own immune system, because the neurochemicals that are released from our bodies due to fear can absolutely impact our immune system. So please stay safe, stay healthy, do the best you can, and let's get through this together.